The August sun beat down on the parched earth outside Fort Smith, Arkansas, with a fury that could kill a man in hours. And when Levi Fordham first spotted the woman tied to that wooden post at the edge of the ravine, he thought she was already dead. It was 1873, and Levi had been riding fence lines for the Carmichael Ranch for 3 days straight, checking for breaks and rustlers in the scorching heat that had turned the Arkansas River low and sluggish. His own canteen was nearly empty, his throat parched despite rationing his water carefully. The land stretched out in all directions, brown and unforgiving, with only scrub brush and the occasional twisted oak breaking the monotony. He had been thinking about the cool darkness of the saloon back in town, about a tall glass of beer and a bed that did not move beneath him, when he saw her. She slumped against the post, her dark hair hanging in tangled curtains across her face, her dress torn and stained with dust and sweat. Her wrists were bound above her head with rough rope, and even from 50 yards away, Levi could see the raw, bleeding skin where she had struggled against her bonds. His horse, a steady bay gelding named Rusty, snorted and tossed his head as if sensing something wrong. Levi spurred the horse forward, his heart hammering against his ribs. As he drew closer, he could see the slight rise and fall of her chest. She was alive, but barely. Her lips were cracked and bleeding, her face burned red from exposure, and her eyes remained closed even as he dismounted and rushed toward her. "Madam," he said, his voice coming out rough and cracked from his own thirst. "Madam, can you hear me?" She did not respond. Levi pulled his knife from his belt and sawed through the ropes binding her wrists. The moment he cut through the last strand, she collapsed forward into his arms, her body burning with fever. He lowered her gently to the ground, supporting her head as he reached for his canteen. "Easy now," he murmured, tilting the canteen to her lips. "Just a little at first." The water touched her mouth and she stirred, her eyelids fluttering. Then her eyes opened, and Levi found himself staring into the most striking hazel eyes he had ever seen, even clouded as they were with pain and confusion. She tried to drink greedily, and he had to pull the canteen back. "Slow," he said gently. "You will make yourself sick." She managed a small nod, and he let her have another careful sip. Her hands came up, trembling, to grip his wrist as she drank. When she finally pulled back, gasping, tears streaked through the dust on her cheeks. "Thank you," she whispered. "They left me here to die. Who did this?" Levi asked, anger flaring hot in his chest. He looked around, suddenly aware that whoever had done this might still be nearby. "The Morrison gang," she said, her voice barely audible. "They robbed the stagecoach yesterday. I was the only passenger. When they found out I had no money, no jewelry, nothing of value, they decided to make sport of me. Said I could pray for deliverance while the sun cooked me alive." Levi had heard of the Morrison gang. They had been terrorizing the territory for months, hitting coaches and small settlements, always staying one step ahead of the law. They were known for their cruelty as much as their crimes. "We need to get you out of this sun," Levi said. He looked around and spotted a small cluster of rocks about 100 yards away that would provide some shade. "Can you stand?" she tried, but her legs buckled immediately. Levi caught her and, without asking permission, lifted her into his arms. She weighed next to nothing, and he could feel every bone in her body through the thin fabric of her dress. He carried her to the rocks and settled her in the shade, then went back for his horse. When he returned, she was sitting up, her back against the cool stone, her eyes closed. He sat down beside her and offered the canteen again. "Drink more," he said. "We have a long ride back to town." She took the canteen with steadier hands this time. "I am Rose Northwood," she said after drinking. "I was traveling to Fort Smith to meet my brother. He works at the courthouse there." Levi Fordham, he replied. I work the Carmichael Ranch, but right now I am more concerned with getting you to a doctor. Rose shook her head. I will be all right. I just need water and rest. She looked at him then, really looked at him, and something in her gaze made his breath catch. You saved my life. That water, it was all you had left. He shrugged, uncomfortable with her gratitude. Could not very well leave you there. Many men would have, she said softly. The Morrison gang, they laughed as they tied me up. Said no one would find me out here until I was picked clean by buzzards. Levi felt that anger surge again. They will answer for what they did. Fort Smith has a federal court now, Judge Parker. He does not take kindly to outlaws. They rested in the shade for an hour while Rose regained some strength. Levi watched her carefully, noting the intelligence in her eyes, the determination in the set of her jaw despite her ordeal. She was beautiful, he realized, though he felt guilty for thinking it given the circumstances. Her face, beneath the sunburn and dirt, had fine, delicate features, and her hair, when she tried to comb it with her fingers, was a rich chestnut brown that caught gold highlights in the filtered sun. Tell me about yourself, Rose said suddenly. I need to think about something other than being tied to that post. So Levi talked. He told her about growing up in Tennessee, about losing his parents to cholera when he was 16, about making his way west and finding work on various ranches. He told her about saving his wages, about his dream of having his own land someday, a small spread where he could raise horses. He talked until the sun began its descent toward the horizon, and Rose listened, asking questions, smiling at his stories. When the worst heat of the day had passed, they began the journey back to Fort Smith. Rose rode in front of Levi on his horse, leaning back against his chest, and he kept one arm wrapped around her waist to steady her. She fell asleep against him, and he found himself hyper-aware of every breath she took, every small movement she made. It was full dark by the time they reached town. Fort Smith was bustling even at night, with saloons lit up and the sound of a piano drifting through the streets. Levi rode directly to the home of Dr. Samuel Yates, the town physician, and pounded on the door until a light appeared in the window. Dr. Yates, a portly man in his 50s with kind eyes and capable hands, took one look at Rose and ushered them inside. He examined her in his treatment room while Levi waited in the front parlor, pacing like a caged animal. When the doctor finally emerged, he was smiling. She will be fine. Dehydrated, sunburned, and exhausted, but nothing that rest and care will not cure. The young lady is asking for you. Levi followed him back to the treatment room. Rose was sitting up on the examination table, her face washed clean, her wrists bandaged. She looked impossibly young and vulnerable in the lamplight. The doctor says I need to stay in town for a few days, she said, but I have no money for a hotel. Everything I had was in my valise on the stagecoach. I will wire your brother, Dr. Yates said. What is his name? Thomas Northwood. He is a clerk at the federal courthouse. The doctor nodded. I know Thomas, good man. I will send word first thing in the morning. In the meantime, my wife and I have a spare room. You will stay with us. Relief flooded Rose's face. You are too kind. Levi felt a strange reluctance to leave. I will check on you tomorrow, he heard himself say. Rose smiled, and it transformed her entire face. I would like that very much. The next morning, Levi was back in town before the sun had fully cleared the horizon. He had ridden back to the ranch the night before, reported to the foreman about the fence lines, and then spent a sleepless night thinking about Rose Northwood. He told himself he just wanted to make sure she was recovering properly, that it was the decent thing to do, but he knew it was more than that. Dr. Yates answered the door and grinned knowingly. She is having breakfast with my wife. Come in. Levi found Rose sitting at the kitchen table, looking remarkably better. The angry red of her sunburn had faded to pink, and she was wearing a borrowed dress that actually fit her. Her hair was pulled back in a simple braid, and when she saw him, her face lit up. "Levi, I was hoping you would come." Mrs. Yates, a plump woman with a warm smile, immediately set another place at the table. "Sit, sit. You look like you could use a good meal." Over breakfast, Rose told them more about her journey. She had been living in St. Louis with her elderly aunt who had passed away 3 months earlier. With no other family except her brother Thomas, she had decided to come west to Arkansas to start fresh. "Thomas has been writing to me for a year, telling me about Fort Smith, about how it is growing, how there are opportunities here," she said. "He thought I could find work as a teacher. I have my certificate." "The town is always looking for educated folks," Dr. Yates said. "Especially teachers. The school board would be lucky to have you." After breakfast, Levi and Rose walked through town together. Thomas Northwood had already responded to the doctor's wire and was making arrangements to come from the courthouse to see his sister. In the meantime, Rose wanted to see the town that would be her new home. Fort Smith sat on the edge of Indian Territory, a rough and ready place where civilization met the wild frontier. The federal courthouse dominated the center of town, an imposing stone building where Judge Isaac Parker presided over one of the largest jurisdictions in the country. The streets were a mix of respectable businesses and rougher establishments catering to cowboys, soldiers, and traders. "It is different from St. Louis," Rose said, watching a group of Cherokee men ride past on painted ponies. "It is different from everywhere," Levi agreed. "But it is honest in its way. Out here, you are judged by what you do, not who your family was." They walked to the river and stood on the bank, watching the brown water flow past. "I keep thinking about what happened," Rose said quietly, "about how close I came to dying out there. And then you appeared, like something out of a dream." "I am glad I was riding that fence line," Levi said. "If I had gone a different direction or left an hour earlier." "But you did not," Rose said, turning to face him. "You were exactly where you needed to be, exactly when you needed to be there." "Do you believe in fate, Levi?" He looked down at her, at the hope and wonder in her eyes. "I believe I was supposed to find you," he said honestly. Rose reached out and took his hand. Her fingers were small and delicate in his work-roughened palm. "I do not know how long it usually takes to know someone," she said, her voice trembling slightly. "But I feel like I have known you much longer than a day. Is that foolish?" "No," Levi said, his heart pounding. "I feel it too." They stood there on the riverbank, hands clasped, while the world went about its business around them. Neither of them noticed Thomas Northwood approaching until he called out his sister's name. Thomas was a tall, thin man with Rose's same hazel eyes and a worried expression that cleared into relief when he saw his sister. He swept her into his arms, hugging her tightly. "Rose, thank God you are all right. When I heard what happened, I wanted to ride out immediately and hunt down those animals myself." "Levi found me," Rose said, pulling back to gesture at him. "This is Levi Fordham. He saved my life." Thomas shook Levi's hand with genuine warmth. "I owe you a debt I can never repay. Anything you need, ever, you just ask." Over the next few days, Levi found excuses to come into town as often as possible. Rose was staying with her brother in his small house on the edge of town, recovering her strength and beginning to make plans for her future. She met with the school board and was offered a position teaching at the one-room schoolhouse starting in September, just a few weeks away. Levi would come calling in the evenings after his work was done, cleaned up and wearing his best shirt. They would sit on Thomas's porch and talk for hours, sharing stories, dreams, and fears. Thomas, recognizing what was happening between them, tactfully made himself scarce. "Tell me more about your dream ranch," Rose said one evening as they watched fireflies dance in the gathering dusk. "It is just a dream," Levi said, but she shook her head. "Dreams matter. Tell me." So he described it. A small spread in the hills north of town with good water and grass where he could raise and train horses. He had already scouted the land, had even talked to the owner about buying it. He was close to having enough money saved. "How close?" Rose asked. "Maybe another year if I am careful." "That is not so long," she said softly. "And when you have it, what then?" Levi looked at her, at the way the fading light caught in her hair, at the gentle curve of her smile. "Then I will build a house. A real house, not a shack, with windows that let in the morning sun and a porch where you can sit and watch the sunset." "You?" Rose asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "You," Levi confirmed, taking her hand. "Rose, I know this is fast. I know we have only known each other a week, but I cannot imagine my future without you in it." Rose's eyes filled with tears. "I was so afraid, tied to that post, thinking I would die alone in the wilderness. And then you came and you gave me your water, your last water, without hesitation. You gave me life, Levi, and now I want to give you my life in return." He kissed her then, gently, reverently, and she kissed him back with a passion that surprised them both. When they finally pulled apart, both breathing hard, Rose was smiling through her tears. "So we are engaged?" she asked. "If you will have me," Levi said. "I will have you," Rose replied. "Today, tomorrow, and every day after." They were married in October in a simple ceremony at the Methodist Church in Fort Smith. Rose wore a dress she had sewn herself, pale blue with white lace at the collar, and Levi wore a new suit that Thomas had insisted on buying for him. The whole town seemed to turn out for the wedding, curious about the romance that had swept through like a summer storm. Dr. and Mrs. Yates stood up with them, and Thomas gave his sister away with tears in his eyes. As Levi slipped a simple gold band onto Rose's finger, he thought about that day in August, about finding her in the burning sun, about the impulse that had made him give her his last water without thinking twice. Judge Parker himself presided over the ceremony, his stern face softening as he pronounced them man and wife. "I have seen a lot of evil come through my court," he said to the assembled guests at the reception. "But I have also seen goodness and courage and love that transcends hardship. This young couple embodies all of that. Let us celebrate them." They moved into a small rented house in town while Levi continued to save for the ranch. Rose started teaching at the schoolhouse and quickly became beloved by her students and their parents. She had a gift for making learning exciting, for reaching even the most reluctant pupils. Levi continued working at the Carmichael Ranch, but now he had a new urgency to his saving. Every penny he earned went into the jar they kept hidden in the back of the pantry, and Rose added her own modest salary as a teacher. That winter, news came that the Morrison gang had been captured. A posse led by one of Judge Parker's U.S. Marshals had tracked them to a hideout in Indian Territory and taken them without firing a shot. They were brought back to Fort Smith to stand trial. Rose was called to testify at the trial, and Levi went with her, sitting in the gallery and watching as she recounted her ordeal with calm dignity. The leader of the gang, a scarred man named Silas Morrison, stared at her with cold eyes throughout her testimony, but Rose never faltered. When she described how Levi had found her and given her his water, Judge Parker interrupted. "This man gave you his last water in that heat, knowing he had miles to ride." "Yes, Your Honor," Rose said clearly. Without hesitation, Judge Parker looked at Levi sitting in the gallery. "Stand up, young man." Levi stood, uncomfortable with the attention. The judge studied him for a long moment, then nodded. "That is the kind of character we need in this territory. The court recognizes your bravery and compassion." The Morrison gang was found guilty on all counts. 3 of them, including Silas Morrison, were sentenced to hang. The executions were carried out on a cold February morning, and though Levi and Rose did not attend, they felt a sense of closure knowing that justice had been served. Spring came, and with it, opportunity. The owner of the land Levi wanted, an elderly rancher named Henry Walsh, died peacefully in his sleep. His only heir, a daughter who had moved to Boston years before, wanted nothing to do with frontier property. She put the land up for sale at a price even lower than what her father had quoted. Levi and Rose counted their savings and found they had enough, just barely. They bought the 160 acres in April of 1874, less than a year after Levi had cut Rose free from that post. The land was everything Levi had described and more. Rolling hills covered in good grass, a year-round creek running through the property, and a view that stretched for miles in every direction. There was an old line shack on the property that had seen better days, but it was structurally sound. "We can live here while we build the house," Levi said, standing with Rose at the door of the shack. Rose looked around at the single room with its dirt floor and leaking roof. Then she looked at Levi and smiled. "It is perfect." They threw themselves into building their future. Levi continued working at the Carmichael Ranch while using every spare moment to work on their property. He repaired the line shack, making it weatherproof and comfortable. Rose finished out her school year, then joined him on the land full-time once summer came. Together, they began building their house. Thomas helped on weekends, as did some of the men from the Carmichael Ranch. Slowly the frame went up, then the walls, then the roof. By the time autumn arrived, they had a 2-room house with a covered porch and real glass windows. The day they moved in, Rose stood in the center of their main room and cried. "It is everything you promised," she said. "A house with windows that let in the morning sun." Levi wrapped his arms around her from behind. "And a porch where we can watch the sunset. Come here." They sat on their new porch as the sun painted the sky in shades of orange and pink. Levi held Rose close and she rested her head on his shoulder. "You remember what I said to you that first day?" Rose asked. "About fate. You asked if I believed in it," Levi said. "I believe we were meant to find each other," Rose said. "I believe that everything, even the terrible thing that happened to me, led to this moment, to us together on our land, watching this sunset." "I believe that too," Levi said, kissing the top of her head. That winter was hard but joyful. They had 3 horses now, the beginning of Levi's breeding program, and Rose helped him care for them. She had quit her teaching job to focus on the ranch, though she talked about maybe teaching again someday. In February, Rose discovered she was pregnant. Levi was overjoyed and terrified in equal measure, immediately becoming overprotective of his wife. Rose tolerated his hovering with patient amusement. "I am not made of glass," she told him one day when he tried to stop her from carrying a bucket of water. "Women have been having babies since the beginning of time. But this is my baby," Levi said. "And you are my wife, and I nearly lost you once. I am not taking any chances." Rose softened at that. She took his face in her hands and kissed him gently. "You will not lose me, I promise." Their son was born in September of 1875, on a cool autumn evening with Dr. Yates in attendance and Mrs. Yates helping. Levi paced outside until he heard the baby's first cry, then rushed in to find Rose exhausted but smiling, holding a red-faced, squalling infant. "We have a son," she said wonderingly. They named him Samuel Henry, after Dr. Yates and the rancher who had owned their land. Samuel was a healthy, hungry baby who kept them both up at night but filled their house with joy. As Samuel grew from baby to toddler, the ranch prospered. Levi's horses gained a reputation for being well-trained and reliable, and he began to make a name for himself. Rose managed the household and the books, proving to have a head for business that complemented Levi's skill with horses. Thomas was a frequent visitor, doting on his nephew and helping out around the ranch whenever he could. He brought news from town, including the information that Judge Parker's court was finally making Indian Territory safer. The lawless element was slowly being driven out or brought to justice. In the spring of 1877, Rose told Levi she was pregnant again. This time, the pregnancy was harder. She was sick for months, unable to keep food down, and Levi worried constantly. Dr. Yates assured them this was normal, that some women had easier pregnancies than others, but it did not ease Levi's fears. Their daughter was born in December, 2 weeks early and in the middle of a snowstorm that prevented Dr. Yates from reaching them. Levi delivered his own daughter with Mrs. Yates coaching him through it, and though he was shaking with terror the entire time, both mother and baby came through healthy. They named her Grace Ellen, and she was the image of her mother, with the same hazel eyes and delicate features. Samuel, now 2 years old, was fascinated by his baby sister and insisted on helping with everything. The years passed in a blur of hard work and happiness. The ranch grew from 3 horses to 20, and Levi had to hire help to manage it all. Rose started teaching again, holding lessons in their main room for the children of neighboring homesteaders who were too far from town to attend the school there. Samuel grew into a bright, energetic boy who loved horses as much as his father. Grace was quieter, more thoughtful, but she had a stubborn streak a mile wide. Together, they filled the house with laughter and chaos. In the spring of 1880, nearly 7 years after Levi had found Rose tied to that post, they decided to take a family trip back to Fort Smith. Samuel was 5 now, Grace was 2, and Rose was pregnant again, though barely showing. They stayed with Thomas, who had married a school teacher named Margaret the year before. The 2 couples sat up late talking while the children slept, reminiscing about how far they had all come. "Sometimes I think about that day," Rose said quietly. "About how close I came to dying, about how my life could have ended before any of this happened." Margaret, who knew the story, reached over and squeezed her hand. "But it did not end. You were saved and you built this beautiful life." "We built it," Rose said, looking at Levi with such love that it made Thomas clear his throat and look away. "Together." The next day they visited the spot where Levi had found Rose. The wooden post was long gone, but the cluster of rocks where they had sheltered from the sun remained. They stood there together, Levi with Samuel on his shoulders and Rose holding Grace's hand. "This is where everything began," Levi said, looking around at the empty landscape that seemed less hostile now, in the spring with wildflowers blooming. "No," Rose said. "This is where everything changed. Where it began was when you decided to ride this way instead of another, when you chose compassion over self-preservation, when you gave me your water." Samuel, curious, asked, "Papa gave you water?" Rose smiled up at her son. "Papa saved my life. He gave me his last water when I was dying of thirst, and then he brought me to safety. He is the bravest, kindest man I have ever known." "That is why you married him?" Samuel asked with the logic of a 5-year-old. "That is why I fell in love with him," Rose corrected. "I married him because I could not imagine spending my life with anyone else." They rode back to town as the sun began to set, Rose leaning back against Levi in the wagon with Grace asleep in her lap, and Samuel chattering excitedly about everything he had seen. Levi thought about that day 7 years ago, about how he had been thinking of beer and a bed, and had instead found the love of his life dying in the sun. Their 3rd child, another boy they named Thomas Joseph, was born that November. He was an easy baby, content and smiling, and Samuel and Grace adored him. The house they had built was getting crowded, so Levi added on 2 more rooms, giving the children their own space. The ranch continued to thrive. By 1882, Levi had established himself as one of the best horse breeders in the territory. He bought additional land, expanding their property to 300 acres. Rose's informal school had grown as well, and she now taught 8 children from neighboring homesteads. They weathered droughts and harsh winters, celebrated births and mourned deaths. Thomas's wife, Margaret, died in childbirth in 1883, leaving him with twin daughters to raise alone. Without hesitation, Rose and Levi welcomed him and the girls to live on the ranch. Thomas helped with the horses while Rose and an older Grace helped care for the twins. It was chaos at times, with 5 children in the house ranging from baby twins to 8-year-old Samuel, but it was joyous chaos. The house rang with voices and laughter, and Levi would often come in from working the horses to find Rose surrounded by children, teaching them to read or helping them with sums, and feel his heart swell with gratitude. In the fall of 1885, 12 years after he had found Rose, Judge Parker came to visit the ranch. He was older now, his hair white and his face lined with the weight of all the justice he had dispensed, but his eyes were still sharp. "I wanted to see how you folks were doing," he said, accepting a cup of coffee from Rose. "You have built something remarkable here." They showed him around the property, proud of what they had accomplished. Samuel, now 10 and already skilled with horses, demonstrated his riding ability. Grace, 8 and serious, explained the bookkeeping system she had helped her mother develop. Little Thomas, 5, just wanted to show the judge his collection of interesting rocks. That evening, sitting on the porch that had witnessed so many sunsets, Judge Parker looked at Levi and Rose and nodded approvingly. "You two give me hope," he said. "I see a lot of darkness in my work, a lot of cruelty and violence. But then I see people like you who choose kindness, who build instead of destroy, and I remember why I do what I do." "You saved us," Rose said. "The justice you brought to the Morrison gang, it gave us closure, it let us move forward." "You saved yourselves," Parker replied. "I just removed the obstacles. The life you have built here, that is all you." After the judge left, Levi and Rose sat alone on the porch. The children were asleep inside, even Thomas, who had outgrown his grief enough to laugh again. The ranch was quiet except for the sound of horses moving in the corral and the chirp of crickets. "You ever regret it?" Levi asked suddenly. "Marrying a cowboy, living this hard life?" Rose turned to him, her eyes wide with surprise. "Regret? Levi, you are my whole world. You and our children and this land we have built together. How could I possibly regret any of it? You could have had an easier life. In town, teaching at the school, married to someone with a steady job and a house that does not need constant repairs." Rose laughed, the sound bright in the darkness. "Easier, perhaps, but not better, not fuller, not filled with this much love." She took his hand and placed it on her stomach. "And not filled with this." It took Levi a moment to understand, and then his eyes widened. "Another baby." "Another baby," Rose confirmed, smiling. "Due next spring. Are you happy?" "Happy." Levi pulled her into his arms, holding her close. "Rose, you make me happy every single day. Another child is just more blessing on top of all the blessings you have already given me." Their 4th child, a daughter they named Hope Marie, was born in April of 1886. She came into the world screaming her displeasure at being disturbed, and continued to be the loudest, most opinionated of their children. Grace, now 9, took on the role of big sister with serious dedication, while the boys treated their new sister like a fascinating toy. As the 1880s drew to a close, Levi and Rose found themselves looking back at all they had built with wonder. Their ranch was prosperous and respected. Their children were healthy and happy. They had family and friends, a good life carved out of hard work and determination. But more than all of that, they had each other. The love that had sparked in those desperate moments in the burning sun had grown into something deep and unshakable, tested by time and hardship and emerging stronger for it. On a warm evening in August of 1889, exactly 16 years after Levi had found Rose, they rode out to that spot by the rocks. The children were old enough now to manage themselves for a few hours, with Samuel at 14 practically an adult and fully capable of keeping his younger siblings in line. They stood together where Levi had first cut Rose free, where he had given her his water, where their story had truly begun. The land looked different now, less harsh somehow, or maybe they had just changed enough that it no longer seemed so threatening. 16 years, Rose said softly. Sometimes it feels like yesterday, and sometimes it feels like forever. Do you remember what you said to me? That first time we talked on Thomas's porch, Rose thought for a moment, then smiled. I asked you about your dream ranch, and I told you about it, about the house with windows that let in the morning sun, about the porch where you could watch the sunset. Levi turned to face her, taking both her hands in his. But I left out the most important part. What part? That none of it meant anything without you. That from the moment I saw you, even before I knew your name, I knew my life had changed. I gave you my water because I could not do anything else, because the thought of you dying when I could prevent it was unbearable. Rose's eyes filled with tears. You gave me everything. Life, love, home, family. Everything I have, everything I am, I owe to you. No, Levi said firmly. We owe each other. We built this life together, and we will keep building it together for as long as we both live. They kissed then, deeply and passionately, as the sun began its descent toward the horizon. When they finally pulled apart, both were smiling. We should get back, Rose said. Before Samuel decides to feed the children nothing but cornbread for supper again. Levi laughed and helped her onto her horse. They rode back toward their ranch as the sky turned gold and pink, two figures silhouetted against the sunset, heading home to the life they had built from nothing but courage, kindness, and love. The years continued to pass, bringing new challenges and new joys. Samuel grew into a fine young man who took over more and more of the ranch work, allowing Levi to slow down as he approached his 50s. Grace became a teacher like her mother, opening a proper schoolhouse on their land that served all the surrounding homesteads. Thomas followed his father's path with horses, showing an almost supernatural ability to gentle even the wildest animals. And Hope, loud and opinionated Hope, declared at age 12 that she was going to be a doctor like Dr. Yates, and no one doubted she would do exactly that. Rose's brother Thomas remarried in 1890, a kind widow named Sarah who loved his daughters as if they were her own. They stayed on the ranch for another year before buying their own small property nearby, remaining close to the family they had come to depend on. In 1895, Fort Smith celebrated the opening of a new courthouse building, larger and grander than the old one. Judge Parker presided over the ceremony, though he was clearly in failing health. Levi and Rose attended with their grown children, and afterward they visited the spot where they had been married all those years ago. 22 years, Levi said, his arm around Rose's waist, and I love you more now than I did on our wedding day. That is because you know me better now, Rose teased. You know all my faults and terrible habits. I know that you hog the blankets and that you cannot cook beans without burning them and that you cry at every wedding no matter whose it is, Levi agreed. And I love every single thing about you. Judge Parker died in November of that year, and the whole territory, mourned the passing of the man who had brought law and order to a lawless land. Levi and Rose attended his funeral, remembering how he had married them, how he had recognized Levi's courage in his courtroom, how he had visited their ranch and given them hope. As the new century approached, the Fordham Ranch had become an institution in Arkansas. People came from 3 states away to buy horses from Levi and Samuel Fordham, knowing they were getting quality animals. Grace's school had a reputation for producing well-educated students who could hold their own anywhere. Thomas had married and started his own horse training business on a corner of the ranch land. And Hope, true to her word, was studying medicine with Dr. Yates, who had announced he was looking for someone to take over his practice when he retired. On their 25th wedding anniversary in October of 1898, Levi and Rose renewed their vows in a ceremony attended by what seemed like the entire county. Their 4 children stood up with them, grown now but still clearly their parents' children, with the same values of hard work and compassion. That night, alone in the bedroom they had shared for so many years, Rose lay in Levi's arms and reflected on the journey they had taken together. "You know what I think about sometimes?" she asked. "I think about that moment when you cut me free from the post. About how you could have ridden on, could have decided I was already dead, could have kept your water for yourself, about how different my life would be if you had made any other choice." "I think about it too," Levi admitted, "about how easily I could have missed you entirely. If I had ridden the fence line a day earlier or later, if I had gone a different direction, if I had been looking the other way at that exact moment." "But you did not," Rose said. "You found me, and you saved me, and you loved me, and I have spent 25 years loving you back." "Here is to 25 more," Levi said, kissing her forehead. They got their wish and more. Levi and Rose Fordham remained active and devoted to each other well into their 70s, watching their children have children of their own, watching the ranch continue to thrive and grow. They saw the turn of the century together, marveling at how much the world had changed since that day in 1873, when a cowboy had given his last water to a dying woman in the burning sun. Samuel took over the ranch entirely in 1905, running it with the same dedication his father had shown. Grace's school became part of the public school system, with Grace as its principal. Thomas's horse training business expanded to include a breeding program that complemented his father's legacy. And Hope became Dr. Hope Fordham, the first woman physician in Fort Smith, carrying on Dr. Yates's practice after he retired. In the summer of 1910, Levi and Rose celebrated their 37th wedding anniversary surrounded by 4 children, 12 grandchildren, and more friends than they could count. The ranch that had started as a dream had become a legacy, something that would continue long after they were gone. They sat on their porch that evening, the same porch Levi had promised Rose all those years ago, watching another sunset paint the sky in brilliant colors. Their hands were wrinkled now, their bodies slower, but the love between them burned as bright as ever. "No regrets?" Levi asked, the same question he had asked her 25 years earlier. "Not a single one," Rose replied, squeezing his hand. "You gave me water when I was dying, and I gave you my heart. That was the best trade anyone ever made." They sat together as the sun disappeared below the horizon. 2 people who had found each other in the most unlikely circumstances and built a life that exceeded every dream either of them had ever dared to dream. The ranch stretched out around them, solid and real, filled with the sounds of family and life and love. And in the gathering darkness, with stars beginning to emerge overhead, Levi Fordham thought back to that day in August when he had spotted a woman tied to a post in the burning sun. He thought about the decision to stop to help, to give away his last water to a stranger, It had seemed like such a small thing at the time, an instinctive act of compassion that required no thought, but that small act had changed everything. It had given him Rose, and she had given him a life beyond anything he could have imagined. She had given him children and grandchildren, love and partnership, purpose and meaning. As Rose leaned her head on his shoulder, Levi wrapped his arm around her and smiled into the darkness. He had been a cowboy with a dream of owning land and raising horses. He had achieved that dream and so much more, but none of it would have meant anything without the woman he had found dying in the August heat. They had built their forever together, one day at a time, one choice at a time, starting with the choice to offer water to someone in need. And as they sat together on their porch, watching the stars emerge one by one, they knew that every challenge they had faced, every joy they had shared, every moment they had spent together had been worth it. Their love story had begun in desperation and heat, with rope and dust and suffering. But it had transformed into something beautiful and enduring, a testament to the power of compassion, the strength of commitment, and the miracle of two souls finding each other in a vast and unforgiving land. The cowboy had cut her free and gave her his water. And in return, she had given him everything that mattered. Together, they had found their happily ever after, and they lived it fully, gratefully, joyously, for all the days of their long and blessed lives.